We are. Hello, everybody. So, welcome to our conversation for Winona Forever, Van Gogh, Van Gone. This is in support of the Kickstarter. Thank you to everybody who participated in the Kickstarter, backed the Kickstarter, for my two friends here, who are the creators of Winona Forever, Van Gogh, Van Gone. We have Shawn Patrick Boyd, who is the writer of this series, and we have Elijah Henry, who's the artist of the series. I'm very, very happy to be joined by both of these folks. I'm merely a fan of Winona Forever, Van Gogh, Van Gone. I wanted to start with a little bit of a story. My name is Matt, by the way, about how I came to Winona Forever. And so, the thing about me in comic book shops is whenever I go to a new comic book shop, the first thing I do is I go to the local creators section. Every comic book shop I ever go to, doesn't matter what city I'm in, that's the first stop that I make is just kind of see what the local creators are up to. And I went to actually quite a few shops in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Winona Forever was kind of well represented in a lot of different shops. And I was really impressed, number one, by the presentation value. It was just really well done. I was also really impressed by the volume of the piece. When I actually came to Winona Forever, it was being published in single issues. And if I'm not mistaken, there were three or four single issues that were out at that point, and so I was able to pick those up. And I myself come from a self-publishing background in my very, very, very earliest days in my comic book career. And so I felt a real kinship with Shawn and Elijah even before I knew them. And so I came to Winona Forever really impressed. The fact that a writer and artist had done over 100 pages of material in the self-published space was astounding to me. And then what is even more astounding is that they came back for more and did a second volume. And so at this point, they have over 300 pages of self-published comics together, which I find to be just incredibly, incredibly impressive. And I was happy to be asked to moderate this talk today. So the first question that I had for you guys was it a foregone conclusion that we were even going to have a second volume of Winona Forever?
Yeah, I'll talk about that one, Elijah.
Sure.
Because you might not even know, but yeah,
Yeah.
in my brain it was. So when I first wrote the first script, I wrote it as a movie script, as both of you know, and then I thought, wait a minute, movies are really expensive and hard to get made. So let's do this in a different way. Revised it as a graphic novel, and then connected with Elijah, and we did that. But so from the very start, no, I didn't think that there would be a sequel. But as soon as we began working on, the first volume, Winona Forever, I was like, oh, I want to go further with these characters. So very quickly, and maybe it was just Elijah's energy and his enthusiasm and his talent. It was like suddenly the world just expanded, and it was like, oh, we can keep going. So yeah, in my brain it was, and I was trying to look back based on your question, Matt, to go, well, when did I decide that it would be a thing, like a second one? And I found in an old notebook, like I had drawn this simple little diagram. It's okay if you can't see it because it's not that impressive, but it's basically like, Winona Forever, junior high, Winona Lost, college. So it was originally called Winona Lost, and then the final was called Winona Returned or Regained. And it's like they were adults. So very quickly, I had decided this was going to happen. And yeah, I think it was something about Elijah and me and our connection. And then as the characters came to life in this book, I could just see more. And so yes, it was basically a foregone conclusion once Elijah started drawing.
Nice. And for you, Elijah, was it an automatic yes? Did you have a lot of work on your plate that you needed to clear the decks on? Talk about kind of your experience coming to the second volume, coming out of the first volume.
I was so hopeful we would do another one. It was one of those things where it was the first one was such a massive undertaking, but it was every moment of it was so much fun. I mean, we did the first one kind of around the pandemic time. So I think it was just kind of like a bright what do you call it? Like a beacon of light, I think, for the both of us during kind of a dark time. So I know we both really enjoyed doing the first one. So I remember not being too I didn't want to poke and prod too much because I didn't want to be like, we need to do the sequel right now, Sean. But I remember being like, I really hope we do another one. And I do remember uh, Sean sending me the script for the second book, and all Sean's scripts I just read from top to bottom every time I get them, and I just read that one, and I was just like, I need to draw this. We need to do this. So it's curious to get your input on it a little bit, Sean, because from my perspective, I was like, I really hope we do this because I was so hungry to get back at it, and then to learn a little more about your thoughts was yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, yeah, and you know, to piggyback on what you're saying, or to kind of answer a little bit more about, you know, was it a foregone conclusion? It was like somehow when we were working on this book, your energy just I started to coast on your energy, and because I'm ahead of you in terms of scripting, like I had delivered the whole script to you, you had basically it was probably about a year and a half of you. It probably took you about a year and a half to do the whole first thing,
Yeah.
but so meanwhile, I had nothing to do, and I was like, well, I'm going to start writing this second one. So I think I had finished a first draft in like fall of 2022. It's sometimes time gets so mushy, but I think
Yeah.
it was around then. Um,
Yeah,
I
and
don't.
sometimes
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, and sometimes the thing that we forget about comics is that the writer might spend, a couple weeks working on the script, a month working on the script, a couple months working on the script, depending on how long the script is. But the artist is going to spend months,
Yeah.
sometimes years working on the project. And so there is a real disparity there in terms of the workload for each creative part of the equation.
There really is. And yeah, Elijah lived with these characters more than I did for sure. Because you had to like inhabit them, you know, to draw them. They have to be in your body in order for you to express them.
I love them to death. Every time I got to draw them, it was a huge. I was very grateful every time I got a chance to draw them, and to draw them kind of as being older and being more complex was a real treat as well, for sure.
That's awesome. And speaking about the characters is a great segue. So when I came to Winona Forever, what was really cool was that around that time, I think both of you were about to send the complete collection for the first volume off to print. And so I was kind of boots on the ground for the very, very end of the first Winona Forever volume, and was talking to you all about the cover design and such, and just various aspects of the book itself, and then was able to be kind of a fellow traveler, if you will, on the second volume from the very beginning and watch all of the success that you two were having, which was a real treat for me. But at the characters in particular, the outcasts, I'm curious about where you wanted to take the characters in terms of story for the second volume and where you wanted to sort of evolve those characters along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So for the second volume, Van Gogh, Van Gone, where I wanted to take the characters was this: is most of the time, the advice they would probably give you in publishing is if you start, like, if they are in middle school, in the case of Winona Forever, they're in eighth grade. Probably the typical advice would be like, okay, now they go to high school. So now the next book is ninth grade. The next book is 10th grade, a la Harry Potter. That's the formula. It obviously works, very well when it works, but that's kind of what you do. But for better or for worse, I was like, I don't really have interest in exploring who they are a year later. I don't know that it's going to be a big enough difference. And I just thought, okay, if I do that, I'm serving an idea of what's good and what's successful. I'm not serving the creative inspiration, the excitement, which is what are they like when they're in college? So that's why I wanted to fast forward with the next book. And I was a little bit scared. I'm like, well, is the audience going to be disappointed that we're not seeing that next, seeing them in high school, that we jumped over it? And I thought, I don't know. I think that's underestimating an audience. And I think that's also underestimating the power of a creative inspiration. That if you follow the creative inspiration, that's where the energy is. That's where people, if there's energy, people will connect to it. And so I'm really glad that I did, because I had no interest in jumping a year or 2 years. I had a lot of interest in jumping. In this case, it ends up being 6 years, and there's a good reason for why 6 versus 5, but it's not that interesting. It's a personal reason. So, well, I'll tell you, since I introduced it, I thought, okay, as a freshman in college, that's a whole new world. You're really learning who you are and where you fit. I wanted to jump to their sophomore year because I was like, okay, now they're a little more established in college. They a little bit know who they are at that point in life. That's where I want to introduce them and see where they're at that point. Plus, I wanted to see where their friendships had gone after a year in college. Because in my experience, that first year in college, you change a lot. And the friends, the significant others you used to have, those have sometimes fractured and frayed those relationships just through the natural course of human life. And so I wanted to see what are those friendships now after a year in college. So that's hopefully that answers the question, but that's where I wanted to take them and why.
Yeah, that does. And Eli, I'm curious, just sort of aging these characters up for you in terms of the character designs. And you had already lived with these characters for so long at the ages that they were. What was it like for you sort of redesigning these characters in a way with the new ages that you were playing with?
It was a lot of fun because I'd spent so much time with the characters in the first book. And you kind of just you start to get a bit of an instinct for how they behave in certain instances and what their styles would translate into as they get older. So I remember talking with Sean a little bit about how each character would look like. Pretty Boy designed his own clothes, so he had kind of this flowery, intricate, kind of almost blouse. That was very cool.
Yeah.
Um, and someone like Darby, their style maybe changes a little bit, is more subtle. But I just had a ton of fun doing that because it translates, it kind of lets you get a little bit of insight into their personality, into their character. And I did my level best to kind of show that throughout the book. And yeah, it was a fun challenge for sure.
It's great. Speaking of challenges, we're going to get back to that a little bit later in the conversation because I do have some questions that surround some of the challenges that you all faced. But in terms of learnings, I want to start there for a second. You both came to Winona Forever um, pretty green in terms of the comics industry, working in comics. I have to imagine that there were like major learnings that you experienced going through the first volume to the second volume, and it's worth noting that Winona Forever has had not only two successful Kickstarters at this point, but is it three or is it four? Because you did the single
Oh,
issue
that,
as well.
I think let's see, we did three. We've done four total for the whole series. Yep. Yep.
So to successfully fund four Kickstarters on your first go is astonishing. It's really, really, really impressive. And so I'm just curious, from the first series that came out, what were some of the learnings that you took away that you took with you into the second volume as you became more experienced, as you became more sort of deft in your comic book careers?
Yeah. So yeah, the things, wow, it was nothing but learning for me, and I'm sure Aloysius feels the same. Because when I first came to Winona Forever, like I said, I developed it as a screenplay. I had been writing screenplays for about a decade, and was working in that format. And while there were similarities, there were things that I of course had to learn about this form. I did read comics as a kid. Matt and Eli and I have talked about this before, but I wasn't I wouldn't have said like, oh, I'm really into comics. I guess I didn't really realize that I was really into comics. But I did know the format. I had absorbed some of it, but I still had a lot of catching up to do. So I had to like read all of the great things that I had missed since childhood, which are, just manifold of stuff behind me is what I'm kind of gesturing at, to sort of make sure I understood the form at an even deeper level of craft. So that just is a little bit of background. But I think the couple things that I really took away from the first book is that readers are way smarter than I gave them credit for. It
Hmm.
wasn't that I ever thought that readers weren't smart. It was that I, as a storyteller, really want to be clear and want to make sure they're not lost. And particularly with a book that is reliant on twists and mystery, I wanted to make sure we seeded mystery in the right way where people were curious, but they weren't confused in the first book. Then I went and spoke to a couple of sixth grade classes, so kind of like the bread and butter of where the audience is with the books, middle grade. And these kids asked me questions that I never would have anticipated they would have asked. They were asking me thematic questions. They were asking me specifics about why I chose in a particular scene, to have a character say a particular thing. And I was like, okay, I've underestimated how intelligent they are. And with the second book, I thought, look, let me try to push this a little further. Let me try to make the mystery even a little bit more complex. And, just like go out on a ledge. Like they're smart. I can go out on a ledge and push it, scare myself. And that's one thing I really learned. And then the second thing I learned was to let Elijah Henry cook.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the first book, I was a little more heavy-handed. Elijah would probably be generous and not use those words, but a little more heavy-handed about this is what this person looks like, this is what they look like. Pinterest boards, etc. The second volume, yes, I did have Pinterest boards, but I think what it was more for is a communication aid to Elijah so that he didn't have to do so much work on his own to envision these things. But hopefully, Elijah, I feel like this is more true even as our partnership evolves with projects we're currently working on. I feel like I'm much less like I just am like, you get this. Elijah gets it. You know what I'm thinking. Like there is a real mind meld that has happened, and so I
Definitely.
I don't think I was just a lot looser, and so I just really learned like let Elijah let him go, let him go. So hopefully that came through, and hopefully it's
Definitely.
coming through even more now.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, even for the first book, I never felt that you were too heavy-handed. It was just it was one of those things where like from the get-go, I feel like we just had a good chemistry in terms of the work we wanted to do. And we both were people that wanted to get quality work done as expeditiously as possible to get to the next thing and the next thing. And that's just how I work. So yeah, I mean, I've never felt I never felt it was like, oh my God, Sean, the worst boss I've ever had. Never, never, never. Quite the opposite.
Yeah,
That's
what did you sorry, what did you learn? I went on so long. What did you learn?
Oh yeah, a ton, so much. Oh my God, just a tomes full. I remember when we first talked, I had created one graphic novel. You could probably call it more like a picture book, actually, for my thesis project in college. And it was it was not great. It was really not good. I looked
That's
back and
not
it
true, by the way, people. I've seen
it's
it.
not
That's
good.
not true.
It's not good. But I remember we talked on the phone, and the first thing I said was, "Listen, I've never actually done this before. So if you want to do this, I'm 100% down, but you're dealing with someone that I've loved comics ever since I was, itty bitty child, but I've never actually been able to pull it off." But what I learned was that um, I basically was able to kind of regiment things a little bit and they say not to turn your hobby or your passion into a job, but I kind of disagree with that. I kind of think that if um, you're able to discipline yourself a little bit with working on the things you love, I think something really positive can come of it. Not to mention the fact that you were very encouraging and proactive with your feedback and with just the story you wanted to tell. So it never felt difficult. It never felt like an uphill battle by any means. So I guess the learning aspect came from me just how do I build a great comic book page, and I had never really done that before I met you and before Winona Forever. So there was a little bit of learning in that regard, and that just goes into the basics of draftsmanship and design and all that. But yeah, I guess eventually that came out in some way,
yeah.
fortunately.
what that makes me think about, Elijah, is I heard somebody say once that the only labor that's sustainable is a labor of love, and so I really
Yes.
do think that when you love something, and you're really passionate about it, it can keep you going eternally,
Yes.
and this is a great segue into your collaboration because I've talked to the both of you about how special and how unique your collaboration is. What the two of you have together as creative partners is exceedingly special. And we'll invoke the great Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. If you look behind Sean's left shoulder there, you'll see the criminal hardcovers on his bookshelf. We're all big Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips fans. They've worked together for ever. They have thousands of pages under their belts as a creative tandem. And what's so cool about the two of you is you have a true creative tandem that has produced hundreds of pages of comics together. Um, and even throughout my entire career, I mean, that's very rare to say, even amongst, the top working professionals in the field, to find a creative partner that you just kind of jive with and harmonize with in such a cool way is, as I said, it's really special. And so, I'm just curious how your creative relationship has evolved over the course of this series. Starting out as two people who did not know each other, who had to build trust in the creative realm together, and who now, as you're talking, we know, are sort of very, very, very well established, and have also gone on to do other things outside of Winona Forever together. So, can you talk a little bit about that creative tandem and just how unique and special that is?
Elijah, you start.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I think as a illustrator, as a freelance illustrator, I put my clients at arm's length just a little bit when I start out, because I just want to keep a professional relationship. I don't want to get too friendly. I want to kind of set certain boundaries. So I think the first few months of Sean and I knowing each other, there was a little bit of I I doing, I'm kind of a mercenary, I guess. I am the artist on your project. This is your vision. I'm going to help you realize that. But I think it's pretty much impossible not to be friends with Shawn Patrick Boyd. So uh, I very quickly I felt myself being like, okay, this is a really good guy, and this is somebody that I want to work with in the future. And yeah, I think it kind of was a combination of a lot of things. It was Sean's, generosity, his willingness to listen, his um, tenacity. All of that kind of made me trust Sean more, trust the process more. I think it helped the work, uh, and you know, I honestly think that it was a pretty quick realization that it was going to be a very positive and very fruitful relationship with Sean creatively. So yeah, like I said, I was definitely at first kind of I treated Sean a little bit like another client. I wouldn't say we had a particularly, it was just kind of very professional, but it didn't last long. Sean is a great dude, and his his story. I read the script the first night I got it all the way through. And I think even from that point on, I'm like, yeah, this is a guy that's just he knows his stuff, and yeah, so not a hard relationship to grow by any means.
Yeah, well, that's super kind of you, Elijah. Yeah, I thinking back. Okay, so we met in 2020, and Elijah was literally just out of art school. Like I think it was June 2020 or July 2020. And that's when we first connected, not in person, of course, because the pandemic and we live in different cities. But and at that point, it was really like, oh, I think this guy, I can see what he can do, and I think he's going to be great at this. We did character designs, and I was like, yeah, he's the one. But truly, to Elijah's point, it was really more of a client sort of, I wouldn't say boss, but whoever payer payee, what's the right word? Payee payer. Anyway, um, So
employer, employee, but I don't really like those terms when we're talking about the creative stuff. So yeah,
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 Mr.
yeah, I don't,
Moneybag, something like that.
we'll just say co-creators.
co-creator, yeah. But it's man, Matt, you reminded me of this a couple weeks ago in a conversation. How great creative partnerships develop organically. You can't force them. You can't force the moment, and that's kind of what happened with Eli and I. It started off as a okay, I'm paying Elijah to do this work because he deserves to be paid. He's exceptional. It takes a lot of time, raise money through Kickstarter, use some of my own money to do that. But then as the time evolved, just the sheer, I mean, you're in a relationship, you're like, we're sharing. I don't want to call it parental, but it's like we're raising these characters, right? And we're both invested in this. And also, Elijah is putting a lot of heart into it. He, as much as he said it's like, oh yeah, it was like a client relationship, it was like he can't help but put his heart into it, and that is evident in every single panel. You feel a real person in here, you feel the care. And so how do you not just open your heart to somebody like that? And then over the course of doing 300 pages, man, you're just gonna get closer. Because if you don't, you wouldn't get to 300 pages. That's not gonna happen. And so yeah, it's just evolved organically. And then I'll say this is since we got hired, it was about a year and a half ago to do a story for Boom Studios, and that's thanks to Matt seeing Winona Forever and then saying, "Hey, these guys are good storytellers. Maybe we can give them a shot." In our upcoming horror anthology, which was called Hello Darkness. It launched in July. Our issue, our short story, came out in October, in the beautifully in that kind of Halloween timeframe. And that also took our relationship to another level too, because now we were truly meeting as peers. Like we are both have an investment in this story. We're both being hired. We're both being paid. So that dynamic of like employer, that's just gone. We're both employees of another company, and that just took it in a whole other direction. I don't know if for you, Eli, it felt like that, but I really relished that. It was really nice to be able to kind of put down me being the creative manager, publisher, writer, all of those things. It was just nice to kind of put that down and go, I'm just the writer and I'm working with my guy here. And we like now we're just playing off each other. We're a team. And that was really fun. Like we became a
Yeah.
unit, I think, in that process.
Yeah, it really was a ton of fun, definitely.
And I could see the potential, obviously, from day one with the both of you and Winona Forever. And what was so fun when we did the Hello Darkness short story is it was like a dream come true for me. It was exactly what you hope for when you bring somebody in for a new story and you're working with somebody for the first time. You hope that they're able to kind of not only deliver their best work, but maybe even do something a little bit new and reach some greater heights. And boy, did that happen. I mean, it was really, really just kind of mind blowing to see that both of you come together. And while Winona Forever was kind of more in the middle grade space, even though it's for all ages and can be enjoyed by all ages, the Hello Darkness story is called Dying for Quiet is a decidedly adult story. It's a horror story. And to see the both of you go into that realm and have so much success was really cool. So I'm a process junkie, obviously. I'm sure we have a lot of creative people who are watching this and who supported the Kickstarter who are also process junkies. So I want to spend a little bit of time just talking process. Shawn, we'll start with you. You are a man who has been known to take your vintage typewriters to the coffee shop. Um, and you can probably see behind Shawn there are some vintage typewriters on display. Did you burn through a bunch of ink ribbons writing the script for Van Gogh Van Gone, or did you go digital on this one? Talk about your process writing Van Gogh Van Gone.
Yeah, the process for writing Van Gogh Van Gone did not involve typewriters because that script predated my instant obsession with typewriters. I am a person of, well, I've learned to sort of follow the muse and follow my curiosity. And so if I'm curious about something, I used to kind of criticize that. I would be like, well, here's a perfect example. I started to get obsessed with art heists for
Mm.
some reason. I was obsessed with art heists. And years before, I had been obsessed with um, Motown music. And the way these two came together is this: art heists, they're these objects, these precious objects that people like, there's a power to them, there's an energy to them, such that when they're lost, it feels heartbreaking that this one of a kind piece is lost. Motown music. The bassist for on most of the hit Motown records, James Jamerson, he played bass on, I can't remember what it's how many number one hits, 30 some number one hits, and he played it on this one particular bass that he called the Funk Machine. It's a Fender P bass, an electric bass. For those of you that know, he fell on hard times later in life, alcoholism, and I believe. So don't quote me on that. Do a little look up. And his someone had broken into his apartment and stole the funk machine, and it's never been found. And this that I there was something about the funk machine and this thing that had played on all these magical songs and just gone. And then these paintings that are just gone and never been found, those sort of came together for me. And I was like, I'm going to follow this obsession. I don't know why I'm obsessed with this. I don't know what it's all about. Let me kind of follow it. And then I was like, there's some story. I gotta work this into a story. So that's where the kind of process came from. So I didn't use the typewriter to work out the ideas. I really did do it in a notebook. I just here and there make a note, I'd start writing about something. And it's kind of funny to read back. You guys are both artists. So to read back later, you're like, oh, that's where that idea came from. Well, that went in a whole other direction. But it's fun to see where it came from because you just see the germ of the idea. So that's kind of where it came from. Obsession with art heists and just being like, I'm going to go into this. And notebook work. And last thing I'll say is, for those of you, when you read Van Gogh, Van Gone, there's a reference to an art heist at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, a real museum in Boston. That art heist is real, and none of those paintings have ever been recovered, which is really rare. Normally, they get recovered at some point. So they're still missing. And that also just, I like these spaces in history where there's still mystery. It feels like as a writer, there's room for me there because it's like these things have never been found. Ooh, let me fill in the blanks about why and what really happened to them. So that's my process on this one.
And I love how, as a creative person, all of our obsessions, everything that we're researching, the things that we're invested in, inevitably end up in our work.
Yeah.
Everything is fodder for our creative work. And, and I see a lot of beauty, Shawn, in your love for the older technology, kind of zigging while everybody is zagging. We all share an appreciation, for physical media, certainly here in this discussion. And so I think it's really cool that you're hearkening back to an older age with the typewriter. I'd love to see more work coming out of the typewriter.
I was on it yesterday, or on one of them, and why I went to them is I found that I can get a little precise on a computer. I'll backspace a lot and be like, oh, I got to fix that, or no, and it's like that gets in the way of progress. And there's I'm a perfectionist, and I think creativity is the antithesis of perfectionism. I think, yes, at some point you make sure the words are spelled properly and all of that, but early on, I'm really finding it's like, no, I've got to cast off anything that's trying to keep me from doing it perfect. And a typewriter is just that. There's a backspace, but you just type over what you already typed. So it's going to look imperfect if you backspace. So you might as well just move forward. And there's something about it that just frees me to follow the forward momentum. And I've found that my work feels a little more fun to me personally doing it that way. So you'll definitely see more stuff from the typewriter.
Good. Well, I also want to see more eBay links that you send me for my typewriter that I'll. So,
I know. Well, I didn't want to overwhelm you with them because, as I was saying before, I can get really obsessive about something. So I like know far too much, but I'll just try to find you the perfect one and then
yeah,
get to you.
we'll go the one and done route on that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Elijah, same question for you. So I'm curious, your process as an artist. Obviously, we're in sort of a world now with artists where you have some artists who are working more traditional on boards, and some artists who are, working more in the digital space, maybe to be sort of more efficient or to speed up their process. For Winona Forever, were you working traditionally? Were you working digital? Was it a combination of the two?
It was definitely a combination of the two for sure. I always love inking and penciling by hand. I don't think that's ever going to change, if I'm being totally honest. I would like to get a little more experienced with inking digitally. I've tried it a few times and I just haven't loved the feel of it. But definitely 99.9% of my work is inked and penciled by hand. In terms of colors, I primarily uh, do everything digitally. So I did scan all the inks in, did everything digitally. I could really have some fun with some elements that maybe you couldn't do as easily traditionally. I could uh, bring back certain elements. I could make things a little more consistent looking to the eye, especially to the eye of maybe like a sixth grader or a more careful eye when you're zooming up on the ebook or something like that. So um, that was definitely my goal was to kind of have a careful marriage of the two because there's something about the looseness of drawing traditionally that you just can't really replicate digitally, I don't think.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I always love the traditional methods. And I mean, obviously, you can see success in both realms, but I think probably most artists these days are using a combination of the two. Uh, you know,
Elijah, a follow up on that from me, because I don't
Sure.
know. So do you have a book at your house with all the pages from Van Gogh like you did with Winona Forever?
I do. I do. Yes. It's I have so every Winona Forever, I'm looking at them right now actually. They're over there staring at me. Um they every Winona Forever book we've done, I've gotten one of those little portfolio books. You can get them at Michael's or any kind of art shop blick. And I just put the original inks in there so I can come back to them later on and treat it like the actual book. There's no letters or anything, and some of the inks are just filled with mistakes that I whited out or removed digitally. So there's some pages where I'm like, oh, that one stinks. But yeah, so I have them all there, and it's kind of cool just to see how things evolved. And there are certain things where when I scanned them in and did them all, and you and I talked about changing certain things, or be like someone's hand placement is different or looking a different way. So because those inks are done traditionally and those edits were done digitally, it's kind of funny to see how those original versions of those pages and be like, oh yeah, that's how it started. So it's all there.
I didn't know that. I guess I hadn't thought about it. Like a few years back when I went to LA and I was like, well, I'm gonna go visit Elisha.
Yeah.
He showed me for the original Winona Forever, the book, and that was a real trip because it just felt like I was getting behind the curtain, and like for me, dude. I deal in pictures in my brain and then I put them on paper, but that's as far as it can go.
Yeah.
So I feel like Elijah and any illustrator, they're to me they're wizards. I feel like you probably feel like Matt, you and I have talked about this too. Because when you get to see that on the page, you're like, I don't know how you do this. It's astonishing. And there's like a real, I mean, back to my obsession with objects and the power in these objects by artists. I feel like a power in them. And I'm like, I got to be really reverent, like flipping these pages.
yeah,
Uh,
we always say in the industry that never gets old. That feeling never goes away. I can tell you from the day I started in publishing as an editor, getting art from artists in your email is like the best feeling. It just happens almost every day, and you have that feeling. Um, decades later, and it's such a sort of like creative jolt and a jolt of inspiration every day to get those pages in the email. So never goes away. It's always part of the biggest, sort of fun part of the job. And Eli, I would love to see those boards someday. So I might
Oh yeah,
come knocking on the door to come check those out.
absolutely.
So in the spirit of Stephen Pressfield's wonderful book, The War of Art, one of the things that I'm always interested in is sort of the challenges and the resistance that creative people face when they're trying to bring art into the world. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, maybe some of the not so great moments, some of the challenges, some of the resistance that you faced along the way to bring Van Gogh, Van Gogh to market.
Eli, I want to hear from you first on this one. I'm so curious.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I kind of had the easy part a little bit with this experience because I was creating the art. I was kind of being able to sequester myself indoors and just, perfect the art as best I could. But my my responsibility for making the story kind of put out into the world and being able to share it with the world was I didn't take as much responsibility for that aspect of it. So the amount of work that Shawn did was nothing short of astonishing. The amount of work he did to put that book into, multiple stores carry this incredible book, um, just because of Sean's hard work and because of his sort of infectious kindness and personality. But yeah, I think my job was, at least I put it on myself to, I'm gonna create the art best I can, and anything I can do after that point would be sort of cherry on top. But I honestly gained a huge amount of respect just for seeing how much Sean put into getting this book out there because if it's, if it's not a Batman or a Spider-Man book, it's, the odds are already kind of stacked against you a little bit. But the fact that there's so many people out there that are inspired and eager to read this book, I think it's just a testament to good old Shawn Patrick Boyd, SPB.
Well, it's very, very kind of you to say. Um, yeah, your part was not easy. Even if you sort of had to sequester yourself, I could speak to that as like, oh my God, the thousands of hours that Eli spent drawing while the rest of us were doing whatever. This man was sitting there dedicatedly drawing this thing. But yeah, every bit of it is like was a real pleasure for me. But back to like the Stephen Pressfield aspect of it all, like which if you haven't read, for those of you watching The War of Art, read it. It's such a fantastic read. It's a seminal one for anyone trying to make anything. It's really short little essays, usually an essay is 1 page, if I remember correctly. Um, anyway, so back to the blocks and things that get in your way. Dude, I think the biggest block for me when I was writing this was I don't know if it was a block, but the struggle I had was the not knowing. Um, when I was writing this script, as I said, I knew I wanted it to be a little more advanced in terms of the mystery. I wanted there to be more twists, more complexity, more potential bad guys, and also more like, wait a minute, that's not the bad guy. This is the bad guy. And then back to maybe that is the bad guy. I wanted a lot of that. I had been inspired by Knives Out, I recently watched, which owes a lot to Agatha Christie and other generations of mystery writers with twists. But Knives Out, I felt like had set a really high bar for modern storytelling with twists, and so I looked at that and I was like, man, that's how did he do that? How did Ryan Johnson do that? So I like took a lot of notes on that, and then but when I was applying the techniques of twists to this story, there were times I was like, wait a minute, there's some Tibetan monks. I early on was like, there's going to be these Tibetan monks, and I was like, okay, yeah, they're going to be some part of the mystery. But I was like, well, what do they want? What are they doing? Why are they getting involved in the mystery? Where basically like where does it go in the end, right? Like, what are we going to find out about these people? And there are a couple other twists I don't want to spoil for anyone that hasn't read it, because I have learned uh, also in the publishing process, sometimes people, Kickstarter backers, you included, will get a thing and be into it, but they haven't read it yet. It can take, there's a right time when you sit down and read a book. And even if it's a friend or a family member, sometimes it could be a year before you actually sit down and read it. Um, so I don't want to spoil too many twists, but I tied myself in knots over the twists. And I would, like, my poor wife, shout out to Kathleen Smith. She like was just, she would bear with me, and I would be like, honey, I don't get it. Can I tell you what I'm thinking here? And I would like mumble through, try and explain her what I was thinking. And she would just laugh. She goes, "This is really working on you." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was not sure if it was going to be any good. Like, I really wasn't sure. I thought it might be a total train wreck. Um, and, there's a good aspect of that. There's the humility, right? Which drives you to sharpen and to be better. But the bad aspect of it is it can really freeze you. It can completely upend you, and that's of course what writer's block becomes. It's not that we have no ideas; it's that we're criticizing all the ideas we had have as bad. So I was really teetering on the edge of that. My wife really helped me, and also just like really learning. Look, you don't know right now. You will know, and having to remind myself that you've done this before. You did this. You'll get there. But I don't know, Eli, if you experience this, it's a remind. I have to remind myself every time, because you get done with the thing and you're like, oh yeah, there's like a your memory gets erased, and you when you get on to the next project, you're like, wait, how do I do that again? And you almost look at it as a complete, like, you're like, oh, of course, Winona Forever was just complete at the start. It was like you forget all the stages and struggles, because now it's done, and it's like, oh, of course, this was, yeah, it all makes sense in retrospect. The next time you forget, and it's just back to that struggle again. So I think what I really learned is, well, trust. You will get there. Trust it. Keep keep going bit by bit. You don't have to know it all now. And that's the encouragement I would give to all of you too, whatever it is you're doing. You don't have to know it all now. Just what's the next thing you do know to do that. And that's probably good advice for life that I'm really learning through the creative process.
Absolutely. Spoken like a true author, by the way. I tell you, every time I sit down to write, I feel like a new writer, and that sort of follow the next step, kind of what that calls out for me is monthly comics. Monthly comics really lives in that space sometimes. And I've worked with comic book authors who work monthly, who some of them kind of don't even know what's going to happen in the next month, and I don't say that in a negative way. That's part of their process. It's part of what brings the thing to life, and that energy and that kind of playing jazz on the page,
Yes.
and being in the moment with your story, I think is exhilarating. It's a little scary. I think it'd be a little scary for everybody in the creative process, but when we're creating art, I think that's kind of where you want to live. It's kind of where you want to be.
That's where the juice is, I think, is like when you're a little bit scared. Like, obviously you don't want to be terrified, because then you don't act. But if you're a little bit scared, like, oh boy, I don't know if I can pull off this twist. Like, how am I going to do this? Well, that's probably something to go towards. Like, otherwise, if it's like just rote and you've got a formula, it's like that's not too interesting. And yeah, you could probably write a lot of books that way. Look at like Danielle Steele. Oh my God, insane. And I've never read one. I say that not having ever read one of her books. So I'm not saying she's has a formula, but I imagine you have to if you're going to crank like that. But maybe she's just such a mega genius she can do that. But anyway, that's kind of where
Yeah.
it's at.
I mean, there's so many authors like that who I absolutely adore. When you think about Lee Child and the Jack Reacher series, is there a formula at play? Perhaps a little, but he has more, I think, principles and characteristics that he follows more than
Yeah.
just sort of like a plot formula or
Ooh,
what have you, that always
ooh.
keep you coming back for more, because he's really, really solid in knowing who that character is, but also knowing what his audience wants to read.
That's a great, I like that, man. Like there's principles. Yeah, yeah. I learned that also a little bit from Dan Brown. There was someone bought me a subscription to Masterclass years ago. Shout out to Aaron Goldberg. He bought it for me for my birthday. And I like partway through the year, this was probably 2020. I was like 2021, something like that. I'm like, I gotta check some of these classes out. And I was like, who's gonna be able to help me? And I was like, well, Dan Brown, like, I mean, major bestsellers, twists, always ends a chapter on like, oh, I gotta keep reading, right? And so I watched his masterclass and it was absolutely brilliant. It was so helpful. The guy, I didn't realize, is a professor, he's a teacher. So he knows how to teach a concept and break it down for you. And I was like, dude, I took some notes, and that did go into Van Gogh Van Gone too, is some of the Dan Brown skill, but like it's like those principles, like give them a great setting. If you can set it anywhere, set it somewhere really interesting. You know what I mean? That was one, and I was like, oh yeah, that's good. So, so I like that about principles because I think I've experienced that also about some of the greats.
Definitely. Talking about audience for a second. So something that I always find humorous in publishing is I think as creative people, we're kind of sometimes, in our corner, our dark corner, working on our stuff, head down, maybe we don't have a ton of community around us. It can be very isolating being a creator. It can be very lonely being a creator, whether you're a writer or whether you're an artist. And something we always used to joke about in the publishing space is we would go to conventions after coming out of that experience, and we would go, oh right, there's people who read these things. We would have this like great, like, oh wait, we're signing books and we're having conversations with fans, and people are coming up with these wonderful stories about how the book meant something to them, or why they enjoyed the book, or why they enjoy your publishing house, or whatever it might be. And it reminds you that anytime you put something out into the world, there is going to be a reaction. And that can be very scary for a creative person because we do not know if that reaction will be positive, it'll be negative. Generally, there's, obviously sort of a combination of the two. But I was wondering if you could all talk about your audience a little bit and what it's been like putting Winona Forever out into the world. You've had the opportunity to speak to classrooms, you've had the opportunity to speak on panels, you've gone to trade shows, you've gone to conventions, you've met the folks that are reading this book. What has the reaction been like?
Eli, do you want to speak first or should I go?
Sure, sure. Yeah. I've had the pleasure of going to a few signings with Sean in New Mexico, and it's pretty cool to see one of two things, or actually see both things really. The people that have read the book and know every page, that are inspired by it, whether it's just the fact that we were able to do this thing, or the fact that it's just a really lovely story with a great message. Or there's people that come in that never heard of the book before and they buy it and they're fans. That day they're interested in it and inspired by it. So I'm very lucky to say that my experience with audience reaction has been nothing but positive, whether it's from the younger audience that it's kind of geared toward, or just anybody, any age that has gotten some value from it. Um, yeah, it's been good.
Yeah. I what I've really experienced is my internal experience is I've moved from like, oh, it's got to be like really big and popular and resonate with a lot of people, to really cherishing the small moments, because those are really the only ones you can are actually tangible anyway. Like most of the time you don't even hear what someone's response to the book is, because even when we like something and we know the person, we don't know what to say, or we forget to say it, or we don't say it. It's really generous when someone actually gives you any bit of feedback, good, bad, and different. It's like, wow, that was generous and bold. So a couple of kind of those one-on-one experiences that I've had that really were like, wow, this is meaningful to me and I'm going to store this away. um, One was I went to a school, Rio Grande school here in Santa Fe, and every kid in the class had read the book. And this was Winona Forever. And so then, we talked and they asked some amazing questions about theme and character, all this stuff. And at the very end, I said, well, hey, we're working on Van Gogh, Van Gone. It's the follow up. Would you like to see some of the preview pages no one's seen? And they go, oh, yeah. So I called them forward and it was just on my laptop and I opened a couple pages and I accidentally opened to a page where you would find out something about a romance that was blossoming in the second book. And it was obvious because there was a kiss. And they're sixth graders. So what is this, like 12? Yeah, 11, 12. And they were like, oh, they kiss, they get together. There was an electricity in the room that only, kids can bring. And I'm so glad I accidentally opened it to that page because it just showed me how precious this kind of central audience is for the book and how amazing they are. And B, it showed me that they were that into it, that they would get excited about these characters. Those characters were real to them. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. And then the second one was I was at a shop that sells the book, Big Adventure Comics here in town. And there was this, one of the guys that works there called me up and he's like, hey, Shawn, come up here a second. And I was like, okay. And there was a man at the counter. He was probably in his 40s. And he said, he's buying Van Gogh, Van Gone, the sequel. And he goes, this is Shawn. This is the writer. And the guy's like, wait a minute. You wrote this? He goes, the Winona Forever, this is one of my favorite books I've ever read. This, if I ever could write a book, this is the book I would have wanted to write. And I didn't know. It was a lot to receive because that's really high praise. To be anyone's top 1-5 book, whatever, is really high praise. And you really, I really was like, I gotta like really cherish this and really like take this in, really listen to this because I think there can be a tendency, like in our commercial capitalist society, to value the monetary outcome or the numbers outcome and not value what the only thing that's really real is that connection that you make with somebody else through your art. And when somebody is willing to tell you what that connection is and that it exists, oh man, you got to cherish that and humble yourself and be like, thank you, that is so meaningful to me. So there's those are, to me, that was gold. I mean, we could sell 1 million copies and yeah, we'd be in a different place potentially, but I don't think we'd feel any better than those moments like that.
That's so well said, Shawn. I think it's funny when you look back on some of your favorite moments as a storyteller, and even for myself, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about like the paycheck that I received, but the lifelong memories that you have in the real world with people who have read your work and who connect with you, and want to share with you and want to express and be open about those are lifelong memories that you keep with you always.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been so much fun, guys. I want to end by talking about the future. So I know what the future looks like for the both of you. The future for Shawn Patrick Boyd and Elijah Henry is very, very bright. You both have a bright future ahead of you as storytellers. But let's talk about the future of Winona Forever. Are we going to see a third volume of Winona Forever, or should we expect that it's time for kind of the outcasts to walk into the northern sunset and we can say goodbye to them?
Well, yeah, I'm pretty certain there will be a third and final book in the series. That's always how thought about it since I thought about it as a trilogy, and so yeah, that is the plan. Like I'm trying to just follow the energy of it right now. It doesn't feel like I'm ready to dive back in, and I have the energy to do that. My hope would be that at some point, a publisher would pick up the series and we'd get paid to do the third one, But I'm also okay if that doesn't happen. I just know that the energy will be there at some point where it's like it'll start bothering me, and it'll be like, it's time to do it. Maybe I'll be in a different, but like the first two books took so much energetically. They took so much in terms of just money to raise money on Kickstarter, to fund it myself, to all of those things that I'm like, I'm taking a break for a minute from doing it that way.
Mhm.
So if a major publisher comes along and is willing to give us a little bit of money to do it, then that'll help propel it. Or I'll just have rested up enough or saved up some more money and be like, it's time, and I'm ready to um, see where these characters take us as adults. As I said before, they're going to be adults with kids of their own when we next see them.
That's awesome. And, I feel like we have so much exciting stuff ahead of us, especially for the both of you with new work on the way, that, I'd love to sort of just ask where people can find you and how they can just, follow along on your journey, for both of you. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at Shawn Patrick Boyd I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Instagram, Substack. If you sign up, I have a mailing list on Substack, that's where I try to first post any new updates. Eli.
You can, if you Google Eli Art online, you will find all my stuff. I am pretty much everywhere feasibly. Blue Sky, like Sean said, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon as well, if you'd like to support that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I'm all over the place. You can't get away from me online.
Yeah. And Eli and Eli, I feel like we can preview this here. We haven't decided where we're going to publish it, but we're working on a comic strip right now. This just kind of happened organically. I grew up loving comic strips in the newspaper. I'm sure Eli read a ton of different comic strips in various places growing up
Definitely.
too. And one day we were just talking about, I think it was your idea. You were like, yeah, maybe we should do a strip. And then we started like just going, what if it was about this or this? And like in about 10 minutes, we had conceived of an idea for a comic strip called Out of the Woods. And that was the name that was the name that we came up with in the beginning. Um, and it's about some like magical, it's about like fairies and unicorns and other kind of magical creatures, wizards that live in the woods, right? But then suddenly they collide with the modern world. And this one particular character, he wants to become an influencer, like he wants to become a social media influencer. So that's a bit of a commentary on like the emptiness or not of technology in modern society, and then what the magical realm, and I don't know. We're having some serious fun working on it together.
Yeah, that's one thing I do like about our work together is that I think it's evolved ever since the first page of Winona Forever to now. And just going back a little bit about the future of Winona Forever, I think it's definitely going to evolve a little bit, and I'm very excited to see how that pans out when we inevitably tackle that because I think the nature and the flow of our work has really improved and really excelled. So I'm very excited for what the future holds for the comic strip and for everything else that comes our way.
Yeah, I am stoked about that comic strip. I can't wait to read it. I've heard a little bit about it and it sounds incredible. Everybody, please go follow Sean and Elijah. To you who are watching, thank you. Thank you for supporting this book. For the Kickstarter backers that made this possible, thank you for supporting the arts. Projects like this cannot happen without you. So the fact that you actually took a chance on this, it means a lot, and it means a lot to the creative people who work on the project. So thank you for watching us today. Thank you for being with us, and everybody go forth and be well, and we'll see you in the comic book pages.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It was great to
Thank you,
get to
Matt.
talk with you, of all people.
Thank you guys. It was
Okay.
it was wonderful to talk. Be well, everybody.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye.